They laughed when she corrected him. A brigadier general doesn't like being told he's wrong, especially not by a lieutenant who barely looks old enough to vote. When he grabbed her by the collar and shoved her against the wall, he expected silence and submission. What he got instead was a room full of Delta Force operators rising to their feet, a colonel stepping forward with barely controlled rage, and the sudden realization that he'd just put his hands on the most decorated female Green Beret in the entire United States Army. The base didn't just go silent. It held its breath, waiting to see if his career would survive the next 60 seconds. Lieutenant Raina Voss was 28 but looked younger, with sharp features, pale skin that burned in the desert sun, and light brown hair she kept in a tight braid. She stood 5'6" and weighed maybe 130 pounds soaking wet. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was dangerous. That was one of her greatest operational advantages. She'd arrived at Camp Integrity outside Kabul 3 days earlier, assigned as a liaison officer between the Special Forces and a joint task force planning operations along the Pakistan border. The camp housed conventional Army units, Special Forces teams, and a rotating presence of Delta Force and intelligence personnel. Raina moved through the base with quiet efficiency, attending briefings and coordination meetings without drawing attention. She wore a standard Army combat uniform with no unit patch, just her name tape and rank. Most soldiers assumed she was intelligence or civil affairs. The few who bothered to look closer might have noticed the Special Forces tab above her left shoulder, but tabs were easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. She'd learned that being underestimated had its uses. People said things around her they wouldn't say around someone they considered a threat. Raina grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, where her mother worked as an emergency room nurse, and her father taught hand-to-hand combat at a local martial arts school. Her father, Carlos Voss, had immigrated from the Philippines as a teenager and brought with him expertise in Filipino martial arts, Kali, Eskrima, weapons work that emphasized speed and precision over strength. He started teaching Raina when she was 6. Not because he wanted her to fight, but because he wanted her to understand balance, leverage, and how smaller people could defend themselves against larger opponents. By her teens, she was competing in martial arts tournaments across the Southeast, often fighting in divisions above her weight class. Her mother taught her something just as valuable: how to stay calm in chaos. Raina spent high school volunteering in the emergency room, learning to function in an environment where seconds mattered and panic could kill. She learned triage, crisis management, and how to make decisions under pressure. She joined the Army at 21 with a degree in international relations and fluency in Spanish and Tagalog. She'd initially planned to go into intelligence, but during the officer basic course, a Special Forces recruiter approached her. Women had been allowed into Special Forces selection since 2016, but few had made it through the pipeline. He asked if she was interested in trying. She was the 4th woman to earn the Green Beret, completing the Special Forces qualification course after 2 years of brutal training. She specialized in unconventional warfare and foreign internal defense, learning to train indigenous forces and operate in denied environments. She deployed to Colombia, the Philippines, and twice to Afghanistan, leading missions that never made the news because success in Special Forces often looked like nothing happening at all. She'd earned a Silver Star for actions in Helmand Province that her team still didn't talk about. She'd proven herself repeatedly to people who mattered: her teammates, her commanders, the soldiers who fought alongside her. But the Army was big, and most people had never heard of her. Brigadier General Marcus Hayworth arrived at Camp Integrity for a 48-hour visit to review ongoing operations. He was old Army, 56 years old, with a career built on conventional warfare and a reputation for being demanding and short-tempered. He'd commanded a brigade in Iraq during the surge and held strong opinions about how operations should be conducted. The briefing took place in the main operations center, A large room with maps covering the walls and a dozen officers seated around. A conference table. Reyna sat near the back, present to answer questions about Special Forces capabilities if needed. General Hayworth was holding forth on the need for more aggressive direct action missions when a major presented an intelligence assessment about Taliban networks in Kunar province. The major suggested a village stability operation, embedding special forces with local security forces to deny the Taliban freedom of movement. Hayworth cut him off. We don't need more hearts and minds nonsense. We need to find these people and kill them. Send in the SEALs or Delta. That's what they're for. Reyna raised her hand. Sir, with respect, SEALs are Navy Special Operations. In this theater, you'd be working with Army Special Forces or Delta Force, depending on the target set. The room went quiet. Several officers shifted uncomfortably. Hayworth turned to look at her, his face flushing. Excuse me? SEALs are Navy, sir. Army Special Operations include Special Forces, Rangers, and the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Delta Force falls under Joint Special Operations Command. They're different organizations with different mission sets. Hayworth stared at her like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. I know the difference between SEALs and Special Forces, Lieutenant. I don't need a geography lesson from someone who's barely been in the Army long enough to know which end of a rifle to point downrange. A few people glanced at Reyna, then quickly looked away. She kept her expression neutral. Sir, I was just clarifying the terminology for the briefing, were you? Or were you trying to embarrass me in front of my staff? No, sir, just ensuring accuracy. Hayworth stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Who the hell are you anyway? What's your assignment here? I'm a liaison officer from 3rd Special Forces Group, sir. I'm here to coordinate Special Forces. Hayworth interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Let me guess. You're a cultural advisor or a psychological operations specialist. Maybe you handle administrative support for the real operators. The room had gone completely silent now. A lieutenant colonel sitting near the front, a Special Forces officer named Martinez who knew exactly who. Reyna was started to stand up. But Reyna caught his eye and gave a subtle shake of her head. I'm a team leader, sir, she said evenly. I lead Special Forces Operations. Hayworth actually laughed. You, leading Special Operations? That's the kind of political correctness that's destroying this Army, putting people in positions they're not qualified for just to check a diversity box. Before you hear what happens next, let me pause for a second. Stories like this one matter, because they show what happens when assumptions meet reality. If you want more stories that challenge what people think they know, hit that subscribe button. These voices need to be heard. Reyna felt the heat rising in her face, but she kept her breathing steady. She'd been here before. Different ranks, different locations, same fundamental disrespect. Men who looked at her and saw a political statement instead of a soldier. Who assumed her achievements were gifts instead of being earned through the same crucible that tested everyone else. She thought about selection. About the 60-pound ruck marshes through the North Carolina mountains. About the cold, the exhaustion. The moments when her body screamed at her to quit. She'd watched men bigger and stronger than her drop out while she kept moving. Not because she was superhuman, but because she'd learned something her father taught her. Pain is just information. You can acknowledge it and keep going. She thought about Helmand Province. About the village where her team had been ambushed. About returning fire while coordinating air support and directing her team to cover. About carrying a wounded interpreter to the extraction point because leaving him meant he'd be executed. The Silver Star citation mentioned her courage under fire, but what she remembered most was the absolute clarity that came in combat. No room for doubt or second-guessing. Just training and decision-making, and the trust of the men who fought beside her. Those men knew what she was. They'd bled with her, trusted her with their lives, followed her leadership because she'd proven herself in the only arena that mattered. But Hayworth didn't know any of that. He saw a young woman in a uniform and made assumptions that fit his worldview. And right now, he was waiting for her to back down, to apologize, to accept his dismissal. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "Sir," Raina said, her voice calm but firm, "I've completed the Special Forces qualification course, including unconventional warfare training, advanced special operations techniques, and language school. I've deployed 3 times and led multiple operations. I'm qualified for my position." Hayworth's face went darker. "Are you arguing with me, Lieutenant? I'm providing you with factual information about my qualifications, Sir. The general took a step toward her. Several officers tensed. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez half rose from his seat again. "You know what your problem is?" Hayworth said, his voice rising. "You think because the Army lowered standards to let women into special forces, that makes you special. It doesn't. It makes you a liability. When the shooting starts, soldiers like you get real warriors killed." The words hit like physical blows. Around the room, faces showed shock, anger, discomfort. A major from the intelligence section looked appalled. A captain from civil affairs stared at his notes, unwilling to make eye contact. Raina stood up slowly. She was aware of every person in the room watching this confrontation unfold. Aware that how she responded would matter not just for her but for every woman who came after her. "Sir, with all due respect, you don't know anything about my operational record or my capabilities. You're making assumptions based on reality," Hayworth snapped. "On 35 years of military experience. On knowing what works and what doesn't." He moved closer, invading her space. Raina held her ground. "You want to play soldier, fine. But don't stand there and correct me in front of my staff like you have any idea what you're talking about. You're a diversity hire who probably got through training because your instructors were too afraid of lawsuits to fail you." He reached out and grabbed her by the collar, shoving her backward against the wall. The room exploded into motion. 3 things happened simultaneously. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez surged forward, shouting, "General, that's enough." A Delta Force colonel named Briggs, who'd been observing the briefing quietly from the side of the room, stepped into Hayworth's path with an expression of barely contained fury, and Raina, operating on pure instinct and training, executed a textbook. Kylie disarmed her hand, snapping up to control Hayworth's wrist, while her body angled away from his center of gravity. In less than 2 seconds, she'd broken his grip and created space between them without striking him or escalating the physical confrontation. Hayworth stumbled back, shocked that she'd countered his aggression so efficiently. "General Hayworth," Colonel Briggs said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, "you just committed assault on a superior officer." The room went dead silent. Hayworth blinked. "Superior officer? She's a lieutenant." "I'm a Lieutenant Voss," Briggs interrupted. "Holds a brevet promotion to captain for her actions in Helmand Province. But rank isn't the issue here. She's also the recipient of the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and the Purple Heart. She's led more combat operations in the last 3 years than most of the officers in this room will see in their entire careers." He stepped closer to Hayworth, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. "And you just put your hands on her because she had the audacity to correct a factual error you made in a briefing, in front of witnesses, including me." Martinez had reached Raina. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Hayworth looked around the room, finally understanding what he'd done. His face had gone from red to pale. "General, I wasn't aware of her record," Briggs said. "Or that assaulting junior officers is a crime under the UCMJ regardless of their record." The door opened. A colonel from the base legal office entered, summoned by someone during the confrontation. Behind him came the camp commander, a full colonel who took in the scene with immediate understanding. Someone want to tell me why I'm hearing reports of a physical altercation in my operations center? The camp commander said. Briggs turned to him. Sir, Brigadier General Hayworth just assaulted Lieutenant Voss after she corrected a factual error during his briefing. Multiple witnesses. I recommend immediate investigation and relief of the general from his current duties pending review. The camp commander looked at Hayworth. Is this true, General? Hayworth opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no defense. Too many people had seen exactly what happened. The camp commander's expression went hard. General, you're confined to quarters pending an investigation. Colonel Briggs, I need your statement. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, yours as well. He turned to Reyna. Lieutenant, are you injured? No, sir. Do you require medical attention? No, sir. Then I need your statement as well. But first, I want you checked by medical as a precaution. That's not optional. Reyna nodded. Understood, sir. As Hayworth was escorted from the operations center, soldiers began standing up. Not at attention, but in a gesture of respect. First the Special Forces officers, then Delta, then others who understood what had just happened. They stood for the officer who'd been assaulted for doing her job, for the soldier who'd corrected a general and refused to back down when he tried to intimidate her. Reyna walked out of the operations center with Martinez beside her, aware that the next several days would involve statements, investigations, and attention she didn't want. But she'd done nothing wrong. She'd simply refused to be bullied. The investigation took 8 days. Statements from 17 witnesses painted an identical picture. A general who'd physically assaulted a junior officer after she politely corrected a factual error. Medical documentation showed bruising on Reyna's collarbone where Hayworth had grabbed her. Video from the operations center security camera confirmed every detail. Brigadier General Hayworth was relieved of command and forced into retirement. The official statement cited conduct unbecoming an officer and assault under Article 128 of the UCMJ. The unofficial reality was that he'd committed career suicide the moment he put his hands on Reyna in front of witnesses who understood exactly who she was. Colonel Briggs visited Reyna 3 days after the incident. They sat in an empty briefing room, drinking terrible coffee from the dining facility. You could have dropped him, Briggs said. I saw the disarm. You train in Filipino martial arts? My father taught me, Reyna said. Kali and Eskrima, you showed restraint. A lot of people wouldn't have. Reyna shrugged. Dropping a general doesn't help anyone. He was wrong, but violence wasn't the answer. Briggs smiled slightly. That's why you're a good officer. You know when to fight and when to control the situation. Without fighting, he pulled out a folder. I'm putting you in for a commendation. What you did, correcting him, standing your ground, handling the physical confrontation without escalating, that's leadership. Real leadership. Sir, I don't need a medal for being assaulted. It's not for being assaulted, Briggs said. It's for demonstrating the kind of character we need in special operations. For showing every woman who comes after you that they don't have to accept disrespect or abuse. That competence and professionalism matter more than assumptions. Word spread through the special operations community quickly. Not gossip, but the kind of professional information sharing that happened when something significant occurred. Reyna became known as the Green Beret, who'd stood up to a general and triggered his retirement. Her story was told in selection courses, in team rooms, in conversations about leadership and respect. She finished her assignment at Camp Integrity and rotated back to Fort Bragg. When she arrived, her team threw her a quiet welcome back party. No speeches, no fanfare. Just her teammates acknowledging what she'd been through and confirming what they'd always known. She belonged. 6 months later, she was promoted to captain without the brevet designation. Her new assignment took her to the Special Warfare Center in school, where she'd help train the next generation of Special Forces soldiers. On her first day as an instructor, A female candidate approached her nervously. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do you deal with people who don't think you belong?" Raina thought about Hayworth, about every person who'd ever doubted her, about the long road from her father's martial arts school to where she stood now. "You proved them wrong," she sighed. "Not with words, but with performance. You do the job better than they think you can. And when they try to push you out, you stand your ground. Because you didn't earn your place to make them comfortable. You earned it because you're qualified." The candidate nodded, something settling in her expression. "And if they put their hands on you?" she asked quietly. "Then you defend yourself appropriately," Rena said. "You control the situation. And you let the system deal with them. Because ultimately, people who lead with intimidation instead of competence don't last." She smiled slightly. "Trust me on that one." The story of what happened at Camp Integrity became part of the unofficial history of women in special operations. Not because it was the worst thing that had ever happened, but because it was a turning point. The moment when the consequences for disrespecting female soldiers became real and permanent. Brigadier General Hayworth's career ended in disgrace. Lieutenant Raina Voss's career continued upward, built on the foundation of skill, courage, and the absolute refusal to accept being treated as anything less than the warrior she'd proven herself to be.